Assalamu alaikum. Good evening. Welcome to another edition of Welfare Clinic. Today we're going to be discussing about COVID-19 and how did communities manage? How did they cope? What kind of help was available to them? I have two more amazing guests this evening. I'm going to introduce my guest. First of all, Aziza Begum. She's a baby feeding specialist. I'm sure we'll find out a little bit more about that. What does contain in her job? She's working in Hamlets and in Waltham Forest. Welcome, Aziza, to the show.
Hi, Ali. Thank you so much for having me. Assalamu alaikum to all the viewers.
My next guest is a remarkable lady. She has done so much over the lockdown, and no doubt we will hear from her. Her name is Lakmini Shah. She is a councillor in Newham. Lakmini, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Oliur. Great to be with you.
Thank you so much. Just for our viewers, Lakmini is joined us via telephone. You can ask any question on our Facebook page. You can watch us on YouTube, on London Bangla channel, and also you can watch on our Facebook page. Lakmini, let me start off with you. You are a councillor in Newham. You've been living in Newham for over 30 years. You know the borough very well. And during pandemic, something that we never have seen before, not in my lifetime certainly, and many people that I have spoken to, they also said that they haven't seen anything like that. And you were on the ground, you were on the street, literally helping people. What do you think the community went through, and how do you think they managed?
So when Italy was starting to lock down, and when we were watching from Britain what was going on there, obviously our communities in Newham, I assume all over Britain, had all these questions: what we're going to be doing, what's the impact on schooling, education, about jobs, employment, all these things. So while watching all that, I also have a women's group called Conversation Cafes, where there's a lot of women who do quite low-paid jobs, and they're in caring professions, school dinner ladies, and lower-paid jobs. So they were quite concerned what was going to happen during the COVID lockdown if it was to happen. And at that time, only Italy we were watching. So obviously all these questions came up. So I thought it's going to happen in Britain. We were going to lock down. So what I did was I spoke to businesses, I spoke to the faith sector, I spoke to residents, and thought I'll start collecting some rations to help the most vulnerable residents in our society or in Newham. So finally, when the 23rd of March, when we went into lockdown, there were a lot of families, the breadwinners lost their jobs. So yes. Some of them come from, they have the legal right to live in Britain, but they don't have rights to access benefits. So they have something called no recourse to public funds in their visa stamped. So those families had a really hard time. So that meant that even though they have lost their jobs, whereas other residents could apply for universal credit, but these residents couldn't do that. So the community sector, the faith sector, the residents, we all came together to help these residents. So that's the beginning of it.
Although you're saying, Lakmini, obviously the many organizations came together, it's a collective efforts of everybody. However, I have seen and witnessed via social media the amount of work you personally did, from cooking meals, to giving dry foods to residents of Newham. And I must say, it was a remarkable thing to do for a politician, because often politicians don't like getting hands dirty, but you was literally on your knee packing and providing food to families who needed most. Do you think the government could have done something, because we were in unprecedented time, something that we haven't faced before? Do you think they could have provided some kind of help, because those people was legally living in here, they were paying their tax, but they wasn't getting any support, even though it was a crisis?
Yes, so I ran this Abolish NRPF campaign, and Stephen Timms, who's my MP for East Ham area, he did speak to the Prime Minister. I think a lot of
Yes.
you have seen that clip where the Prime Minister promised that there will be help available for these people. So for me, until now, the help hasn't arrived. And it is really, really not fair on these residents. They are behind with their rent payments. They have to pay their bills, and they have been living with what the council has provided for them, which are meal packages or rations every week, and then what the faith sector has given, or in my case, I have helped some of the families, and other organizations like Magpie Project has helped some of the families. I can't name everybody, but there have been a lot of community organizations in Newham who's helped these most vulnerable families, and the help is not enough, and the government could have given them a financial support package, and it's really, really disappointing that the Prime Minister didn't keep his promise.
Yeah, hold on to that. I'm gonna come back to you, Lakmini, in regards to the people are not able to pay their rents and the landlords issue later on in the show. Aziza, if I can ask you, in terms of, you are a mother, you know, you work within the community, you're quite active within the community. Many school has reopened, or in some ways, because they reduced the class size. Do you think the government focused more on pubs and restaurants than children's education? Purely because I'm asking you this, because the Secretary of State have announced this afternoon that from September, if people do not go back to school, possibly parents could face fine. We saw during the pandemic, the government quite rightly and quite fast-moving way opened Nightingales and other hospitals, venues where patients can be treated. Do you think similar thing should have been done for schools, knowing that children will have to go back?
Definitely. I think the government, the way they're responding from the beginning, it's almost like there's a bit of a delay in how they are approaching each aspect when the pandemic was hitting. I think as a mum, definitely, I was very worried. I had children who were unwell, and we decided to isolate before the government told us to isolate, because it just felt like the sensible thing to do. I was very aware of how quick and contagious it was in my own family. From one person, suddenly there were 4 people in my own family who were falling ill very quickly. I think definitely, you know, when going back to school, the fear is still there. You know, we're all very much a part of this. Every single person has been affected by this. So going back to normality has to be done in a way where everyone's mental health, everyone has to be, you know, involved in the process. I know there's a pressure for the government to open pubs and reduce the social distancing, because in a pub you socialise, it's impossible to maintain 2 meters. But I think they have to be very careful, because, you know, in schools, again, they've worked so hard to put in social distancing. My eldest daughter has gone back, she's in year 11. They've taken children back in small numbers. They've worked so hard to make sure there's a small bubble of children going in. So all that hard work, all the effort that's been put in, and suddenly now from Saturday, the pubs are going to be open, where it just feels too rushed to me.
And obviously, in terms of, because we know Leicester has been asked to remain on lockdown for further 2 weeks because of the increase in virus and infection rate. Do you think the government now planning to reduce from 2 meter to 1 meter? we know from what we see in television channels and social media, when people are in pub, when people are drunk, unintentionally, they are less sensible. And clearly that could have an impact on the so-called R rate the government keeps talking about.
Absolutely. I mean, that's the most important thing. We have to watch what's going on in the UK. I watch what's going on globally. I know in some parts, like in Bangladesh, it's still very much a pandemic there. There was a recent news published about a lot of the virus was coming back in from Pakistan. So again, the open borders is an issue. In the UK, Leicester and parts of Wales, we are moving too fast. I don't think any of this should be happening as quickly as it has. I mean, they're going to be opening cinemas and other social venues, and it's impossible to maintain distancing, especially when people are drinking alcohol. Like you're saying, Oli, it's true. People do forget their awareness, and they can be very close to one another. The R rate can quickly, very rapidly go out of control again.
But can I just ask you finally, before I move to Lakmini, in terms of, obviously we understand, but do you think also in terms of economic, the government is also concerned about economic, people's jobs, people's livelihood? Because many people who are legal, who has right to stay in this country, but too frightened to go to jobs, so their job has, their employers issued them with P45. They haven't got no jobs now. When they make claim for benefits, the time they have to wait, and all of this kind of stress families with children having to go through, is probably will end up having detrimental damage in longer terms.
I think definitely this coronavirus pandemic, it will have a lasting effect. I don't think, we might be going back to normal on Saturday, but we are far from normality. Exactly everything you've mentioned. People have lost their jobs. There are families who are now far worse off than they have been before. I know there's an emphasis on families, especially Marcus Rashford. What he did was an amazing thing. But in my family, we were discussing about those of us who work and how the impact was having on working families, because I've got 5 children at home. In terms of cooking, getting the supplies, all of those things, alhamdulillah, I'm able to manage, but it's not the same for every single family that's out there. So even families where both parents are working, or one person had a really good job and an income, even they're struggling, because it's the damage that this virus has done, it will be long lasting. And I hope the government is listening and talking and engaging with people like myself, like everyone who's watching today. We need to let our councillors know, we need to let our local communities, we need to be active in our communities and raise the awareness of how this has affected us, our mental health, our homes, our children, everything was affected because of this virus, and we are far from going back to normality.
Lakmini, you obviously mentioned some of the stuff you was doing during the lockdown. However, as we are now coming out of the lockdown and the government is easing lockdown, although faster than we would like this to happen, what do you think would happen to all of those families that you mentioned, but also the international students, because they are not entitled to any welfare benefits in this country? So what would happen to people like that? Because not every job is opening in fullest way or taking all the employees back. Where would those people go? Where would they go to get the help they need?
Absolutely. It's really, really sad that the government has decided not to help these communities. So especially when we talk about their NRPF community, who's not entitled for any universal credit or any other sort of financial support, there are 5 categories that I came across during the COVID-19 period. So they were the residents who were allowed to work. They've also got indefinite leave to stay in the UK. Their children have British passports, but they are not allowed to have any benefits. So the other category is the asylum seekers, and they're not allowed to work, nor are they allowed to get any sort of benefits. And the third category is the undocumented residents,
yes,
for whatever reason. And I'm not a border agent. My job is to look after any resident or a human being. And at that time, that's what I did. And the fourth category that I came across was who were overstayers of whatever the visas they had, and they obviously were locked down here, and they were speaking with the Home Office. But again, my duty was to feed people, that we in a developed country, we shouldn't let anyone go hungry. And the fifth category was the students, international students who lost their jobs over here. They're allowed to work for 16 hours, and their parents, who mainly came from South Asian countries and some of the African countries. I've met those students. Their parents lost their livelihoods over wherever they came from. So they're really struggling to have some finances transferred to the UK. And these were the people I was helping. But to answer your question, where will they go? It's really sad that there's no other help that the government is providing these residents. So they will have to go back to the charities and their friends and the well-wishers who's doing some marvelous work in our borough to get some help for them. And they also will be looking for some sort of work to get some money in.
Do you think, Lakmini, in terms of obviously the charities, because bearing in mind many charities saying they are struggling themselves to continue providing the help and support to those who needs it most. But also, I think if you look at it, people who are residents in this country, people who are on low income, we know, for example, Newham is one of the lowest income earned in the country. People, those families, even getting support from the government may not be enough once the lockdown is, when the furlough scheme has been reduced from 80% to 70% to 60%. Those families will start to struggle. And we mentioned earlier that people are not able to pay their rent, or they're in rent arrears. And government has given protection for up to September. But come September, do you feel that many people will end up made homeless as a result of not having able to pay their rents?
So we cannot have anyone made homeless. That wouldn't be right. So therefore, if there are situations where families are struggling, the government will have to give extra funding to councils so that we can take it up on board and help these families. So no one should be homeless, and the government will have to act on it and give funding. You can't just say, no, we can't fund you. And I don't think that's going to happen. They will have to fund the councils, because no one can be homeless.
Because I have, seen in some of the boroughs that there is already people sleeping on the street. People are already begging on the streets. I know during lockdown, many homeless people was temporarily provided with accommodation, but obviously those individuals, some of them at least, seems to be back on the street. And my concern is, and concern of my viewers undoubtedly would be, is what would happen to those people, God forbid, if we face with another lockdown or not increasing virus.
So the people who are homeless, Newham Council has done an amazing job where they have gone around, officers have gone at night, picked residents up, and they have been given temporary accommodation. I don't think they're going to be chucked out, but I'm assuming the cabinet member, the mayor, they're talking with the government for more funding so we can look after these residents. In terms of you saying that if the COVID returns back, I mean, we don't know what will happen in the future, but it is about sorting out the problems we have now. And anyone who is going to be homeless, the council has been supporting them, and nobody's on the streets, and I can say that much.
No, thank you for that. I think that will give reassurance to residents of Newham at least that if they face some sort of difficulties, the council will do their utmost best to support them. Aziza, one thing that I want to ask, we have seen among the South Asian community, especially Bangladeshi community, Bangladeshi men in particularly, is very much in danger of this virus. Do you think this social distancing element were never understood by the community? Do you think that some of the businesses didn't fulfill their obligation when it comes to social distancing, or do you think there was just lack of enforcement from the local authorities?
I think definitely the mosques and the imams were very quick to react and send the messages out clearly. And I think I personally felt really proud how quickly mosques were getting that message across. So that definitely helped to reduce. I think we would have had far more deaths, especially people feeling passionate around Ramadan time and missing out Tarawih. It was a completely different time for all of us, and we had to accept that this was going to be the way we were going to fast this year. But in terms of shops, I was astonished to see how very little social distancing measures were put in place. Definitely there was a clear sort of inequality there in terms of people understanding what was going on and carrying out the right measures. You know, shop owners needed to have taken a bit more responsibility, and that definitely should have been enforced by the law. I think police presence would have been great at that time. I was walking to work, so walking from Bethnal Green to the Royal London Hospital. I went on the main road, and some of the shops, there was clearly no social distancing in place. So I think that could have contributed.
And what about the seaside and the beaches that we have seen, not hundreds, but literally thousands? I think Bournemouth at the last weekend or weekend before, they had to declare a state of emergency because of the sheer number of people in there, and also the antisocial behavior, the littering. All of those was a significant concern to that particular council.
I mean, sorry.
People don't seem to listen. People don't seem to understand.
I think when the messages were coming out that the large proportion of deaths were BAME community, I think there was almost sort of relaxation in other communities. So mainly in the white Caucasian communities. But what people fail to understand is this is a global pandemic. You know, we're in America, there's like 125,000 deaths. In all of the countries, if you look at the deaths in Italy, in Spain, all of these countries, everybody's reporting a death. And it's not just the BAME community, it's everyone. This virus is attacking the weakest. You know, if you're unhealthy already and unwell, all of those things that they were telling us from the beginning, you're a higher risk. But then we do know about those numbers of people that died who didn't have an underlying health condition, who are younger, who are in our age category, and you know, the new mums who were dying and babies who were dying. It was clear this pandemic, it's going to affect everybody. And yeah, those scenes from the parks early on, right at the beginning of the pandemic, in our local park in Victoria Park as well, it was astonishing to see, and it was large majority non-Asians from what I could see when the news was being reported. And it's still the case on the beaches, especially during Ramadan when we had a mini heat wave as well. It wasn't the BAME community, it was other communities. And I hope people see that ignorance, that level of, you know, it comes from the media reporting when they were clearly saying that it's the BAME who are high at risk. No, it's everybody at risk. And anyone who's going to the beaches and coming back to their local communities, they're risking spreading this virus. So it's a big level of ignorance, I think.
Lakmini, in terms of Newham is one of the highest, has the highest death rate, and also highest in terms of the virus. Why do you think that is? Is Lakmini still there?
So I think because we have a population where who believe in a lot of extended families living together, you know, and also the housing issue where a lot of people share a house together because they can't afford the rent in London. And because of overcrowding, also lack of social distancing, all these things. And again, maybe the language would have been a problem. People who were NRPF, no recourse to public funds, they could have gone to do all these jobs in London. So we actually don't know a reason why, but it is, what I know is that we need more money from the government so we can help our residents with housing, with all the other things that they need, the facilities. We can, if we have more funding, we can help them. That's what needs to happen.
But do you think, I'm going to ask you a similar question I asked Aziza, in terms of enforcement, do you think there was enough enforcement within Newham, especially when it comes to businesses and when it comes to maintaining social distancing? Do you think the council and the local authority as a whole has done enough in regards to that?
Absolutely. See, the thing is, this is something very new to everybody. So everyone thinks, I'm not going to get the virus. Yeah, and they might be carriers and they can spread it. It's, for me, it's more education than enforcement. It's about informing our residents why they need to be keeping the social distancing. I just read a study published by the medical journal, The Lancet. It says keeping 1 meter distance will limit the chances of infection, right? So if you see the countries, if you see China, Denmark, France, Hong Kong, places like that, they always had 1 meter distance. And then Australia, Belgium, Germany, Italy, people like that had 1.5 meter distance. But UK had a 2 meter distance, and Canada had 2 meters as well. But the medical evidence shows if you have a meter distance, should be okay, and you can stop the virus spreading.
But obviously, like Aziza said, Lakmini, in terms of the government was quite slow in implementing some of those restrictions because the country was in lockdown, but our border was open, so people were freely able to come into the country from wherever they felt like. There was no quarantine in place at that time. And when everything was getting back to normal, the government decided to quarantine people when they were coming in for 14 days, when probably that was not necessary. Even many of the MPs from all sides was strongly disagreeing with such
Absolutely, I couldn't agree more with
policies.
you.
I think government a little bit quicker. Go ahead.
Sorry. Yeah, you can hear me, yeah?
Yeah. So what I was saying, so do you think the government could have acted a little bit more quicker in terms of implementing some of those restrictions?
Absolutely. I was really, really surprised when people were traveling freely. I know some of my friends came from Italy and they weren't checked in the airport. They should have had the PCR check done, and then only they should have released people to the community. So yes, they should have acted a bit faster there.
Aziza, obviously, as I was saying, some of the school has opened and parents will be very anxious whether they want to send their children back in September or not. Some of the children who are on year 5, they will be starting or due to start their secondary school. What would you say to those parents like you who's out there, they're anxious, worried, they don't know what will happen, whether they should send their children, they should not? Because I keep getting phone calls, people asking me, oh, if I don't send my child, would I get into trouble? What would happen? So naturally, they seem to be still very worried. Should they be worried, or it's okay to send the children because the virus is not so bad as it is what it was previously?
Obviously, when the pandemic started in China, China didn't share the information with other countries. So that was a very big disadvantage for the world, because it meant that while we were in real time, the scientists were working really hard to find out about this unknown virus. So I think a lot has been achieved. I know we've lost a lot of people, and all those families have lost because the government was too slow to act and because of all the open borders. You know, it's truly heartbreaking, but I think families need to have conversations as a family, you know, parents talking to their children, children sharing their anxieties with their parents, because we've been at home with our children for nearly four going on to 5 months. We've never done this before. And, you know, I'm a busy working parent and I'm always rushing around, and for me to spend this much time at home, I was working from home. It was a struggle trying to homeschool, and I am keen for them to go back and continue their education, but only if it's absolutely safe for everyone, including the staff who have to travel to school. It's just as important for me to know that the staff are being looked after as much as my children. We are working very closely with our schools. There's lots of communication. We talk with our children. We ask them how they're feeling. My daughter was very excited to go back, and she comes back and tells me how the bubbles have been designed and there's social distancing. The children are very aware they shouldn't be touching and hugging. You know, all of that can come much later. Right now, it's all about taking those small steps. We are all absolutely right to feel this anxiety because we have that fear. We've all been told this virus kills. So this fear is real. And I think schools, if they've been given a budget to support children to come back to school, they should also use some of that budget to help parents as well. So lots of counselling, lots of opportunities to talk, lots of education for everyone, you know, including the parents.
But like you said, Aziza, we know in Tar Hamlets, many schools are oversubscribed. Schools' space is very limited. So even if the school wants to take the children back, how would they do that, and how would they maintain the social distancing element of it? But also in terms of what you're saying, that when it's absolutely safe, the government is telling us it's safe. Do you not trust the government?
Well, I mean, obviously, I know what they're trying to do. They're trying to get the economy started again. They're trying to get all of us to go back to work. I mean, I relied heavily on my parents for my youngest child. That's no longer an option for me. So I'm going to have to continue talking to my employers about working from home so I can manage childcare, because it's now down to me and my husband. So it's all of those things. You know, I understand what the government's trying to do, but not at the risk of more lives being lost. So they need to listen. They need to really take on board what we're feeling and what we're saying. You're right, Ollie. You know, in Tower Hamlets, our schools are bursting at the, you know, there are too many children. I don't know how they're going to do this, if I'm honest. And I think this is where councillors have to make themselves present, we have to start receiving those letters and things for our post again, like we used to before when there's a campaign for election. We need to know who's representing communities now, our community, our children, who's fighting to make sure that children will be safe and parents won't be fined.
So we heard from Lakmini in terms of Newham, and as a councillor, she's saying the council have done as much as possible or best as they possibly can under the circumstances. As a resident of Tower Hamlets, do you feel your local authority have done enough, or they could have done a lot more?
I haven't heard from my local authority for all of this, if I'm honest. I know the schools are working with us, so the head teachers have been fantastic. But yeah, in terms of communication from the local government, I can't honestly say I've received much. I know on Facebook, Ken Livingston and a couple of the other councillors very at the beginning made themselves quite, you know, present. But since then, again, with all of this happening and going back to normality, I haven't seen or heard from our local government.
Lakmini, I want to ask about the community faith organization right across Newham. They have played a significant role during this lockdown, whether it's be church, synagogue, mosque, Gurdwara, temple. They all played a very key role. And how important do you think their role is or was in this pandemic?
Absolutely. All of us in crisis, we always turn to our faith. Yeah. And the faith sector's work, what they've done during the lockdown period, is commendable, and they brought the community together. They served the community very silently, and they filled in that gap that where maybe the government, the local authority, everyone couldn't do, and they filled in that gap. And what is beautiful about Newham is that when there is crisis, I've always seen, because I've lived in the borough for 30 years, I've seen the community, the faith sector, everybody coming together to help our residents. So that's what's really beautiful about Newham. And even in the COVID crisis, I saw the same thing happen where all the faith sectors came together. Everyone, all the religious groups got together and helped their community, not just their faith only, and whoever came through their door was welcomed and helped.
And how do we think that we can maintain this strong bond, a strong unity, even after this COVID-19, or when we completely come out of this? Because often we see a lot of disunity among our communities, especially the South Asian communities. But how can we remain united? How can we maintain this strong bond that we have created during this lockdown?
Absolutely. As a borough, we will be talking to all these faith groups and carry on the work that they have done, and have a constant dialogue and hear their views, take their views on board and work together. I think that is something that we should be carrying on, not should be neglecting or forgotten, because that's one of the wealth we have in Newham that we will carry on with.
Because you was a lead member for East Ham, the area or part of the area that you represent from 2006 to 2016. And I'm assuming you played a very important role during that time, uniting communities, bringing different organizations, different groups together, making sure they work collectively in the best interest of wider society.
Oh, absolutely. Because I've been around for a while now, so I know my community really well. So I have spoken to every organization and worked together in my campaign, which I ran. Of the first phase was feeding the community, helping them to get through the lockdown period. So I have to commend every organization, all the churches, all the mosques, all the Hindu temples, all the Buddhist temples, all the gurudwaras, synagogues, everybody came together and they did their bit. So yes, I tapped into the people I knew and we collectively worked together to help our community.
And one thing that we saw in Newham, which was very remarkable, where obviously during holy month of Ramadan, Muslim communities wasn't able to pray in their usual way. Mosque was closed, but the council and the mayor agreed for the prayers, the call of Azan to be made in loudspeaker. That was a very remarkable thing and very unprecedented thing to do for a local authority, which I'm sure naturally created more unity and love towards the council.
Absolutely. So it's about keeping up with the demands our communities have. It was something very new for our Muslim community, where they had to do their prayers, observe Ramadan at home. So the council decided that the prayers could be played out loudly, so everybody could join in together. And that was an amazing thing. And all the communities came together and agreed that it was an amazing thing to do. It is about facilitating our communities according to their demands. And that's what the council did.
And I think for the record, we would like to put our vote of thanks to you and your colleagues, and especially the mayor of Newham, for taking such a good initiative on behalf of the community. And I'm sure it encourages community to do more and work with the council, because I think it's really, really important that community and the council works in hands, because you are more likely to, you are able to achieve a lot more when you do that than when you're working in isolation.
Absolutely. So always, when you're an elected member, when you're a public servant, you always must listen to the people who put you into power. It is about listening to our communities. It is about finding out their needs and accordingly to deliver an agenda to fulfill their requirements. And that's what not just a council, the government, elected members, MPs, mayors, everybody should be doing. And I think Newham done that really well.
We are almost coming to end of the show. The time does go quite fast on this show when we do start. Aziza, I just want to ask you, what would be your message to all our viewers who are listening? What would you say to them in terms of the virus, in terms of going out to do shopping, because many shops will open, many people, I'm sure you have family members who will be returning to work. What would you say to them?
First of all, can I correct myself? Before I said Ken Livingstone, I'm so sorry, I meant John Biggs as the Tower Hamlets mayor. I think, definitely still be very cautious, when you're going out, wear the face mask if you have one. If not, take absolute precautions to maintain your own social distance. If the government is suggesting 1 meter, you make sure you're keeping the distance that you are. Washing hands, go out if you absolutely have to. I mean, we've done incredibly well to get to 4 months of being at home with our families, being really creative with how we've survived it as well. So keep that alive, keep thinking, do I need to go out? Do I have to go to the cinema? Do I have to go to all these places that are suddenly opening up? Because people are thinking the same way. They want to all go out at the same time. So you don't just really kind of be aware this virus is still around. We're seeing spikes happening in parts of the UK. We know there were spikes happening again in China, where a whole region was closed down again, in Italy and Spain. Just take the time out, do your own research. If it's not in the news, it is online. You can access this information easily. Just stay safe, have lots of conversations. If your children are going back to school, communicate with the schools. If you know who your local councillor is, get in touch with them, speak to your employer, speak to them about how it's affecting you, and what the changes mean for you if your children go back to school, if you haven't got access to grandparents anymore, or other members of the family who may be vulnerable, and shielding. We are still a community and we still have to look out for one another, and we have to do what's right for one another. This pandemic showed that we as a community get together really quickly and support one another, and we did it amazingly. And it's going to be a long road to recovery, but we have to stay strong and we have to help one another through this.
Lakmini, before I ask you to say your final words for our viewers, you also quite passionate about safeguarding of children. And are you worried that children didn't have enough support during this lockdown, or were they enough? I'm not just talking about Newham, but I'm talking about pretty much nationally, because many young people was home, many people probably faced domestic violence and all sorts of stuff.
Yeah, so in terms of children, I'm passionate about children. The reason is they're our future. If we nurture them, they will carry on the good things the generation before have done. And during lockdown, it was everything new to everybody. I think it was an enormous amount of pressure on parents to look after the children. I know in Newham, the schools provided free school meals to parents and carried on helping with free school meals, even though it was lockdown. I know where there were children who got a laptop when he got his laptop broken, and he was an autistic child, and it was helped very quickly. So there were other examples that obviously I haven't got time to tell. It is about helping our community, and if you are struggling, you must talk to your council for help, and go and speak to your local representatives, your MPs, and say the mayor, go and tell what your problems are. or you can email them. So yes, it was hard for children, I have to say, but if they were younger, it was a bit easier. Like mine, I've got a teenager who was really getting bored at home. So what I did as a mother, this was as a parent, what I did was I said, look, there's online shopping being done and the helpers are needed at local superstores. I'm not going to say which superstore.
No, please don't.
I said, go and work. That's what I said. So he started working there, and he's a teenager.
No, and what would be your message, especially to, as a councillor of Newham, to the residents of Newham? What would be your final message, especially because I know many residents of Newham will be watching this show, but also in general, what would be your message to our viewers?
So my message would be, don't take the virus. Just don't think you won't get it. You're not free of the virus. It's still very much around. Keep your 1 meter distance. Always behave in a manner that you might be a victim of the virus. So follow the guidelines of the government and be cautious of your surroundings and look after yourself, look after your community, look after your family. So always be conscious of the virus, that it hasn't gone away. So you have to be cautious that you might be one of the people who will catch it. So you have to take the precautions.
Councillor Lakmini Shah, thank you so much for everything you have done for the community during the lockdown. Thank you so much for joining us this evening, sharing your knowledge. And no doubt, people who are watching this, they would know where to contact if they have any issue or any problem. So thank you for joining us, Aziza. Just before I finish, I'm very curious to know, in terms of baby feeding specialist, what is that?
Okay, so when mums have a new baby, automatically all those worries about, am I doing the right thing? Is baby getting enough milk? How do I know? What support is available? So we, in Tower Hamlets, we see mums before they have the baby. We deliver antenatal workshops for our Bengali mums as well. We have all of our events on Eventbrite. They are free. You purchase a free ticket and you attend just before you have your baby. So learn about it. We deliver it in Bengali as well. And we have the same classes in English for couples as well. So it's open to everyone. So antenatally, we help on the ward. We are there as well. We support mums bedside in the hospital. So we will normally, when there's no COVID and all of these lockdowns in place, we come and see you at home. So we do home visits, and we just support your journey from the minute you have your baby all the way until baby's older and you want to talk to us about anything feeding. We're here to support you. We do the same thing in Waltham Forest, but we're just not in the hospitals in Waltham Forest.
But you work as part of NHS, don't you?
I'm an NHS baby feeding specialist, yes.
Yeah,
So
you and your colleagues obviously have played a remarkable role during this pandemic. Many of your colleagues put their lives on the front line to save others. Sadly, many have lost their lives, and it's only fair that we say thank you to you and your colleagues. Although it's not enough, thank you is not enough for the work you guys have done, but nonetheless, we genuinely appreciate the work you all do. And no doubt in the future, I will have some of the doctors and nurses on the show to talk about the role they played. So thank you for everything you do. Thank you so much for joining this evening.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody, for watching us. I hope this session was useful. If you are suffering, if you are struggling, whether it be food or anything else, as you heard from the Councillor Lakmini Shah, do contact your local council, your councillors, your MPs, your mayor. They are your elected representative. You voted for them. They are there to help and support you. There's many charities, many faith organizations, many community organizations who is out there able to support and provide essentials that you need. You stay safe. Do look after each other. Until next time, join London Bangla. Thank you.